See you sit anywhere?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you're planning board, yeah. I'm on both.
There you go.
I'm a glutton for punishment, so is he.
That was a real glutton.
Oh, that was just
Ordinarily, it's not too bad, it's just every time we do a reassessment, it becomes.
this year.
Well, everybody was saying.
It was just freaking daunting for
Miss
about 8
Mary was
days.
very nice today.
Oh, thank you.
We were supposed to take them up.
Scott was just asking me, solar last night,
Yeah.
he's got a lot of paperwork. Does it start here at the planning board or start at the zoning?
Right now,
He's got enough papers to hand out there. But I wonder if,
the issue is right now is how you have to address things. Because the residential season is the only thing they do in your public utility structure, which is owned by a private company, it's not really a public utility structure, so they may not even be permitted to have it required to use for it. It's entirely possible, in that particular spot, they could do that.
it's a good spot. Good spot from the solar end and
It's a good spot from the solar, I'm not gonna extract any more gravel.
Nope.
Out there.
down here. That's what I was
That would be,
because otherwise we have slits up on the covers.
yeah.
Okay, we'll call the meeting order. Please stand. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start out, we're gonna review the minutes from last month.
See if you cut this in and see if it works. It may not come up because I didn't have it plugged in to charge the battery. Come on, Karen. The only thing I was not sure of is that last motion. Is that correct?
No, we don't have, because we meet on the third Monday, so that's,
Doesn't require-
Oh, no,
that
I
doesn't
mean where
require
it
a
said the
motion.
motion,
I don't know which one I didn't review.
oh no, where'd it go? It's on this page then. Motion to formally appoint the town board as the lead agency. Oh, I changed his name.
Did we appoint the town board, because the planning board, planning board is.
Planning board,
Planning
yes.
board is
My
the
min-
agency. Yes,
My minutes, I took them too fast.
yeah, but I really needed to correct the discussion that at that last meeting, the proposal was presented.
Yeah, for the planning board, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Presented
Okay,
to
this
the
one is
planning
not doing what I want it to do.
because that was the purpose of the public hearing was,
Yeah.
Right.
was to hear the plan that would be constructed in an LC zone so that we could evaluate it.
I wasn't real sure.
Yeah, they made a formal presentation.
Yeah.
They made the formal presentation. Yeah, and the category is unlisted instead of not listed.
Okay. Come on, I
And the overlay creates a public services zone, not emergency services.
Anyway, okay. Am I with you? Yeah, this is the planning board, okay.
Right.
Yes.
And as you said, it's a unlisted or
It's
not?
called, the formal term is unlisted.
Unlisted, okay. Okay. Let me write it here.
Scratch the first sentence there. Under the discussion.
Oh, okay. Scratch that one?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because that's what they were.
we actually received a formal proposal.
All right, got it.
And
Yeah.
public service.
Yeah.
Emergency service.
Yeah.
And so the overlay creates is a public service, is not an emergency service.
Right.
Oh. One time it's emergency, the next time it becomes public.
Yeah, well, the formal term that we amended is public services overlay.
See if I can get this to go where I want it to go.
I'm not sure if I like how it says 4 parcels
Yeah,
on
Yeah,
it.
I don't either. The word, we need to change the word parcel to,
Parking spaces.
yeah.
So it will
Is that
be,
what it,
No, I think what we're talking about is we've got a helicopter pad, parking space, the residential
Right.
building, and the helicopter maintenance.
Yeah.
So there's
Right.
4 facilities on site
Yeah.
rather than parcels.
what was the fourth one? Helicopter pad, parking, maintenance.
There'd be parking space, the landing pad, the maintenance building, and the residence building.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Crazy thing to work. The mouse won't work up here, I can. There.
What is it doing?
No, right over
Go ahead.
there.
Sorry, there it goes. Now-
Okay. Okay.
No, planning board, yeah, and
Thank
we
you.
appointed the planning board as the lead agency.
Yeah, I wasn't sure of that. My note was very cryptic.
did you correct that too?
So that should be correct.
You okay there?
Yep.
So that's maintenance pad or helicopter pad.
Yeah, yeah,
Parking, maintenance, and then,
yeah.
residence.
Okay, how are we doing?
Anybody else have any concerns with the minutes?
Move to accept as amended.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. And also to just take a second to introduce Justin Morat to the other members of the planning board. This is his first night looking into the fire, so.
Me run screaming into
Yeah.
the distance.
So. Going back to our agenda there, minutes are approved, we're gonna go back to our old business, which would be the project up at the fire department. I handed out, so we had 2 concerns on the seeker form. One was the bald eagle, and the other one was the potential of the dump. I handed out a letter here from Environmental Design Partnership, and they went through and did a study on what the potential impacts may be on the bald eagle. I don't know if you want to bring that up and maybe
You can have mine.
Oh, thank you.
we'll let you present your findings on that. And
Yeah, so when we went through the seeker form, as you know, the bald eagle came up as a endangered species that's potentially has habitat or nesting nearby. And so there's a threshold, and you see it in that letter, of 660 feet, where beyond that, it wouldn't be influenced by construction of the facility. This facility, though, is a little bit different with the use, and so actually after this letter we put together, we worked with DEC biologists to understand where that eagle's nest was, and we developed a no-fly zone on the eastern end of Lake Delta below 1,500 feet, which is what DEC asked us to do in order just to be sure that there isn't any impact. And it was outside the approach and departure zones anyway, and so, as I said, we worked with them to establish that no-fly zone below 1,500 feet on the eastern end.
That's where you see the eagle over there. He sits on one of the dead trees in the water. You'll see him sitting there.
Okay.
So,
And then, as far as I understand too, the landfill, that when you do that search through the New York State website, there's nothing that came up
Nothing
on
that pops
that.
up
It's
there.
a little, and the project is quite a bit away from where the site is, and it's not, you're not discharging large amounts of water. It's just basically a residential septic system.
Correct.
is that you? No.
No.
There was, all right, run that one again. The landfill.
Yeah, so
No
when you
significant impact.
when you run through the New York State
Yeah.
database,
Okay.
anything that they would be concerned about would pop up, just given it,
Yeah, it did not.
and it did not pop up. So, as far as the state is concerned, it's not a hazard, and given the scope of this project, that there's not a lot of water that's gonna be introduced into the system, the surrounding area, right?
Yeah.
And there is a buffer zone from it. I don't know if anybody has any questions on the bald eagle. If everybody had a chance to look through that study, if you have any questions pertaining to make sure that they adequately addressed the buffer zone, and if there's I think that's
No problems.
nothing.
No problem with the eagle.
Don't see an eagle in the audience.
Carl also handed out, we have if a motion wants to be made, we have a preliminary draft of what a motion would look like. If people had a chance to look that over.
I'm gonna hand me one of the copies of mine. I actually don't have one of my own. If you want, I can read it.
Yeah.
Okay, this is based on the information that we've seen here and the submission from the company, and based on all the public comments, this is a motion that I will propose tonight if the board agrees with it, or if they want to modify it. So, whereas the Volunteer Fire Company of Western has applied for a conditional use permit to install a support facility and to operate a helicopter air ambulance service under the Public Service Overlay District of the Town of Western zoning ordinance, and whereas the review of the document submitted has identified the location to be within the Land Conservation Overlay District of the zoning ordinance and requires review of the proposed use by the Town of Western Planning Board, and whereas the applicant has provided a plot plan and lot layout for compliance review, an environmental assessment form, and information for the SEQRA required review, and whereas the Planning Board conducted a public hearing on May 15th, 2023, and has taken all applicant information and public comments into account and determined that the evaluation criteria for the Land Conservation District have been satisfied, and whereas the Planning Board has designated itself as the lead agency and has reviewed the submissions and classified the application as an unlisted action under the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, and that a single possible environmental impact, which is the eagle, which was identified, will be fully mitigated, and that no environmental impact statement will be required. Therefore, the Planning Board declares a finding of no impact under the State Environmental Quality Review Act and approves the proposed use of the parcel in question within the LC district, and forwards the application to the Zoning Board of Appeals for final conditional use permit action with the following conditions attached. First condition, in addition to any security fencing provided for the facility, an additional screen fence will be provided to visually separate the proposed facility
from the town park. 2, no town of Western assets or services will be provided for maintenance of entry roads or other elements of the facility. 3, upon abandonment of the facility, the service provider will remove all buildings and other appurtenances and restore the parcel to original conditions to the maximum extent possible. And 4, the codes enforcement officer will submit a section 239M review request to the Oneida County Planning Department prior to action by the ZBA.
So if the members take a second there and think about that, and if that addresses any concerns you
Should I
have.
say something of what I?
Yeah,
The only, on number 3, upon abandonment, that everything will be put back to original condition to the greatest extent possible. The only thing I would like to keep a possibility open is if in the midst of that, the fire company decides that the buildings are something that they can use, that they wouldn't have to be taken out just for that purpose. I couldn't imagine any other purpose. But if the fire company wanted to keep the buildings, I think that we should be allowed that in the written conditions.
yeah. My only concern of that is the house opens up a potential, because that.
Not the house though, maybe just a storage building.
It would be just a hangar, the house would
The house
actually
would go.
be removed.
And the other thing is maybe concern the landing pad that's there. If we want to put a storage building or a training building or something like that, that would give us the ability to do that.
Yeah, I think the house is what makes the biggest potential for an issue with future, because
The only thing is with that house, if you look at fire departments across the state and what's happening with colleges and youth, they have bunking programs now where they actually stay at the fire station, help provide services to the community. And that's something that could be approached at a later time if that building was left there.
yeah, I think the concern is some of the, we had expressed earlier is that, you don't want to get into a residential now, the zone, it wouldn't be zoned as a residential use.
Absolutely.
But I could do the same thing in the firehouse the way it is now, bunking people inside.
Yeah, you see, we just don't want it to turn into you're
Like a
renting it,
landlord type thing?
well, you're renting it to a private
No.
family or.
That condition I could see could be written in.
Right, that's,
I just would hate to lose that option if,
Exactly.
down the road, even, hey, you never know, we become the metropolis of the town of Western and you have to put a paid fire department in there, there's a place to actually house people.
Well, let me put on my chair of the ZBA hat first, and just make the remark. Because this is a conditional use permit, and the ZBA has applied certain conditions, the ZBA can modify those conditions. So if at some future time you decided, hey, we'd rather be able to buy it, you can come back in with that conditional use and ask it to be modified, and the ZBA can modify it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just didn't want it written in stone that everything had to
Yeah.
disappear. That was my concern. I wear even more hats than we do at this show.
So we should keep it the way it is and then.
You can keep it the way it is, or I can add an additional sentence that says, so it would be removed to the maximum extent possible, with the exception of an agreement between the fire department, but between the fire company and the service provider to otherwise leave the buildings in place.
would you actually
Can I add that in
mention,
there?
would you mention the ZBA in that?
Yeah.
Because that might clarify some that.
Let's get something clarified, right?
Yeah.
On the motion.
Because, we can sit here in agreement with what we're saying here, but 15 years down the road, somebody might interpret it totally different.
Maybe the
Okay, so-
abandonment of the facility is determined on the conditions that the ZBA will be put forth.
Well, what I'll do is I'll add this thing, so with abandonment
will remove all buildings and other to the maximum extent possible unless other agreements are entered into by the volunteer fire company and the service provider. So that gives them the opportunity to do that.
How come you weren't a lawyer?
Would you- Do you want to
Too
put,
much personal pride, sorry.
do you want to put in the third, that it's got to be between the ZBA, the fire department, and the company,
Yeah,
so that the town has a voice?
yeah.
All right. If you want to, I'll give you a second if you want to jot something down, and then we can enter that in. And
So are they going to provide additional fence, additional screening?
yeah, and
That's-
Yeah, that's in there, yeah.
That's already, yes. That was part of it.
101.
Was there a certain height
That's number.
for that? Or-
I think it's 4 foot, right? There'll be,
This,
Yeah, that's.
Visually
that's
separate,
the
so
first
it's gonna
condition.
Once
higher
he-
than 4 feet.
once
Yes.
he amends it, then he can send me a hard copy,
Yeah.
because I'll have to put it in the minutes.
yes.
Yeah. So
We'll
I'm
just
not gonna
give
get
him
too,
we'll give him a second to
I'm
write.
not gonna
Okay,
get
so
too.
number 3 will now read, upon abandonment of the facility, the service provider will remove all buildings and other appurtenances and restore the parcel to original conditions to the maximum extent possible unless otherwise agreed upon by the service provider, the volunteer fire department, and the zoning board of appeals.
Can you read that again, Carl?
Pardon?
Could you read that again?
Okay, for the third condition, upon abandonment of the facility, the service provider will remove all buildings and other appurtenances and restore the parcel to original conditions to the maximum extent possible unless otherwise agreed upon by the service provider, the volunteer fire company, and the ZBA.
So,
So basically, if you wanted to leave something there, you would form the agreement, come to the ZBA and inform us, and we say, fine, no problem.
But by the same token, if we wanted the concrete taken up and they didn't want to, they're kind of forced to here.
Yeah, that's what's concerning to me.
It works both
Kind of ties
ways.
our hands, so.
We'll leave it the way it is. That's good.
Yeah, but but adding that final one, it unties your hands, says, hey, if you want to keep this stuff, and they agree to leave it, however you do it financially is irrelevant to us, just come back to the ZBA and said, hey, under the conditions, we want to keep the pad and we want to keep the maintenance building, and the ZBA will say, fine.
We'd hope that reasonable people would be
Yeah.
on the ZBA.
That's part of your
I mean,
condition,
we don't-
that's part of your condition, part of the conditions now would be that you can come to an agreement to leave the stuff there and it's already covered.
Right.
Just let the ZBA know.
I'll second that motion.
You seconded it.
Yeah, so Carl, put the motion on the table.
The motion as of this.
Yes.
Actually, it reads like a resolution, so I can say it's a resolution. All right, and Carl made the motion, and
Well, the final paragraph said, we declare a finding of no impact and approves the proposed use. So, yeah, it does, it reads like a resolution.
so it's basically a resolution, and I'll put the whole thing in the
No, it's
minutes.
it's an approval.
Yeah. And Carl made it, and Paul, you,
I'll second it. Pete, on that stack there, give me one that doesn't say draft. And I will add the comment to the thing, and then Mary can have an official copy for it.
yeah,
So, now, motion has been entered, it's been second, all those in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
that one was
So-
easy.
Motion is passed.
Yeah,
From now, this project will head to the ZBA.
Right. Yeah,
And-
and if I can
Yeah.
interrupt, Scott, you will need to do a 239M request.
Yep.
So the sooner you can do that, and now that it's approved, Mary will post the required public notice, and on June 26th, the zoning board of appeals will meet, and we will hold a public hearing for the approval of the conditional use permit.
okay, you want to do that on June 26th? Now, we have another one that night.
It's all right.
Well, no, I just want to ask Carl, you have,
Yeah, add it to the agenda.
I'll put in, I already put the notice in for the variance request, but I can
Okay.
put in a separate
You want
one
to put in a separate one
for this
to
one.
include that in?
For the ZBA, okay. June 26th, okay.
And from there, then it will then ultimately have to be considered by the town board of Western. And, you know, it's out of the planning board's hands right now. So the next two agencies will have their discussions on what they feel about the project. And goes from there. That was the only old business I had left over. We have Scott, if you have people here for the solar farm.
Yes, I do.
Okay, there's a modified copy. Of course, and then we can sign it, we're all set. Meeting on
Oh, thank you.
Is that 7?
7 o'clock.
Yes, o'clock, thank you.
I see a lot of parking out there, I thought it was protesters.
You couldn't read the sign, you were confused.
Go ahead.
Especially for your first meeting. My name is Lynn McIntyre. I'm a project developer with Sole Source Power. I'm here with Ryan and Adam, and we're going to present you just some preliminary information about the solar array and get your initial feedback on it. So to give you some background on Sole Source, we are a New York-based, veteran-owned community solar developer. We're out of Troy, New York. Our managing members have worked on the development, permitting, financing, and construction of over 350 megawatts across the Northeast. I grew up in Camden, graduated from Camden High School. I live out in Troy, where Sole Source is based out of. And I'm doing the project development for Sly Hill Solar. So the lead contact on all of this, but we have many contacts you can reach out to if you have any questions. So I started in residential solar and commercial, and then I exclusively focus on community solar in New York. So to give you sort of a background on community solar, New York has a really great program where when we put up solar arrays of this size, from 20 to 30 acres, it allows residents to purchase the power produced from the solar array at a discount. So that not just large off-takers like Amazon warehouses or manufacturing facilities who can get a discount on it, allows the residents to have that buying power to be able to get a discount on their national grid bill. So when the solar is interconnected to the grid and turned on, all the residents in Western and the surrounding towns can get a discount on their electricity. There's some other really great benefits. Obviously, the clean energy produced by it is great. There's also some tax revenue that's produced from the solar. So through taxes through the town, county, and school district, we would pay into those taxes, or we would enter into pilot agreements, payment in lieu of taxes to those jurisdictions. So a few things about the property. Brian and Adam are going to dive into the particulars, but I wanted to give you a sense of why we sited this project originally. So this site is located on an old gravel bed through here. So it's a property that isn't really primed for any other sort of development. The soils are very unproductive, and the gravel bed was abandoned a few years ago because they pretty much tapped it out. We also noticed with this site, there's some really robust natural screening around the property lines that we do plan to leave intact so that the site isn't seen by the neighbors, even by the residents who live on the property. Also, the three-phase power is one of the key parts to this. So I think sometimes there's sort of this misconception that solar can kind of go everywhere, and that might happen. The reality is our grid can't handle that. We have really dated infrastructure in New York. And why we cited this originally is the three-phase power that's on the south side right here that comes into the project. Recently, we received feedback from National Grid. We entered into a study with them, and they gave us some feedback that the grid could handle the size of a solar array. Often that doesn't happen. So when you get to this stage of a project where we're presenting to all of you, usually most projects have died, for lack of a better word at this point. There's about 1 in 100 properties that are over 30 acres that might be a good fit for solar and enter the initial contract phase. And then of those 1 in 100, about 80% of them drop out after that point for a number of factors. Topography is one, but the energy infrastructure is really the key reason that a lot of those drop out, that it's just too costly to interconnect any sort of renewables to the grid there.
That southern exposure over the lake must make you just about giddy then.
It's really good southern exposure, and the really great part is it drops down a bit, so there's a tree line that hides it too from the lake. It's really great to find sites that have that natural screening. That's why I wanted to kind of point that out. When you put screening up, it takes some time for that growth to come through. We can plant about 6-foot trees, and it takes some time for those to grow up to cover everything up. So to have some natural screening is really great on a project. I worked on a project over in the town of Ansville. It was a 70-acre solar array, and that went through permitting and just completed in December of this past year. So I worked with the town over there. Very similar case to this. Planning board went through site plan review and seeker review. And yeah, so I think we wanted to get your initial feedback on this. I know I gave you a packet of a lot of papers to read. So get your initial feedback, see if you had any questions on it, but Ryan's going to run you through kind of the particulars of the site and give you sort of an overview.
That one in Ansville, that was the Boardman site?
No, that was actually Tuttle, Jason Tuttle.
Oh, Jason's, yeah, that's right too. He's running away to Tennessee in a few years.
What road was that on?
That's on Palmer Road, so that's in the
Yeah.
pre-construction phase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So my name's Ryan, I'm a civil engineer from Marathon Engineering, and we've got Adam, who's also from our office. Our total actual site here is roughly 32 acres, over a 90-acre lot. We've got 2 access roads. One is for operations and maintenance off of Sly Hill Road. The other one is for the interconnection down along Stokes Westerville Road. And they're really just for, this one here is just for construction and for the maintenance. That's really all I'm going to do.
Okay, so, and you mentioned before, so you have contacted National Grid, and those distribution lines are capable of accepting that much power? Now, how much would you expect the rated generation capacity to be?
So at the inverter, it's 5 megawatts.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's relatively small.
Yeah. New York has a limit for community solar where
Right.
every project has to be 5 megawatts or less. Yeah.
Okay.
The road down at the bottom part, so there will be 5 to 6 utility poles that come in. National Grid owns the first 2 to 3 poles of those, so we're required to have an access road so that they can go in and access those to install the equipment, but also to make any adjustments to that. And then also we take care of that road there. Then the line actually goes underground, and all of the interconnection, all the lines throughout the array are underground too. The above ground lines are the poles at the front that we're required to do because of National Grid's requirements.
It's just interesting the way you're showing the rows laid out there. I would have expected them to go the other way.
That's a good question. Yeah, so
Thought someday.
it's a tracker array. So this is one that
There you go, Phil.
it's becoming a lot more, I guess, popular and more used recently. So the panels actually follow the sun throughout the day, move really slowly throughout it, which is really great in upstate New York. You all know we get a lot of snow, so it helps the snow load to come off.
Well, we can
And
flatten them out so that the wind don't destroy them in the wind event too.
they're reinforced, yep. So all of that comes into the racking too. All of the racking and all of that is looked at when we start to optimize the array and see what we can use for racking and what we would need to accommodate.
I worked on the one down in Schultz Road in Toronto.
Yeah, wow, all right.
Well, there were 2 25-acre,
Okay, yeah.
half-mile apart down there.
Yeah.
Just
that-
past,
Sorry about that. Is that access road right in the middle of that field? That's,
This one down here?
yeah.
Yeah, so that would
Okay.
be, yeah.
So you're kind of taking that field out of production then?
It's not really in production right now, and it's just a 20-foot wide access road up that follows the poles. Outside of that,
Everything
they
else
can
is
use the rest of
underground?
it. Everything, yep, else is under.
Yeah, it really wouldn't.
Well, you taste it now.
You still could, actually.
I'm betting
As long as everything's underground, so for.
big white area is probably Andrew's barn right there, is what I'm guessing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, the barn's right there in the corner.
Red barn.
Right. So,
So we provided you in the materials, the site plan, so all of you have smaller versions of the site plans, and there's a few extra 11 by 17s over here. We provided a decommissioning plan, so when the project is out of commission at the end of the lifetime of it, we have a 25-year lease agreement with the landowner with 4 5-year extensions to that. So the decommissioning plan describes what we'll do at the end of the lifetime of the solar array, and proposes a bond that we will post with the town.
Okay.
and the bond stays active through the life.
Yep.
Because some of these in the beginning, this guy started it, that guy sold it, and then it all gets lost.
Yeah, it's really common now to post bonds, but I think you guys are all a lot more informed too, and we are too, and one of the things is to be able to do this in a sustainable way. So we post the bond with the town. It's really helpful if you reassess that every year. I think you're required to reassess it every year anyways to make sure that the costs are in line with the amount of the bond. But you're able to act on that bond in the event that the solar is not productive. I think in your original bylaw, that was for a 24-month period if it's non-productive, or if it's abandoned. You can abandon. So the town will be good.
All that property is one property owner, there's no separate.
One property owner.
Yeah, it's all land rights there.
Yeah.
So you don't anticipate any major changes in drainage or anything from up there?
No major changes.
I don't know of any problem that exists with it now, so.
You know, and we have a SWIP that we're going to be working with the DEC on for any stormwater pollution prevention plan. Yeah.
Biggest problem will be during construction there.
There are measures put in place during the construction phase.
There was a gravel bed.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's all.
yeah, but they're down to the
All
clay
Colts has
now.
been.
Yeah, they got down to the bedrock stuff.
I worked there 25 years
So-
ago, so.
So part of that parcel or part of it was the old gravel pit, but you're also,
There's a part on the north side that the Andriggs are starting to till a bit now. From what I've been told, they aren't very productive soils
Right.
up there, but they're getting some
Good for
grass in
weeds.
there. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, do you have, normally put something in place to handle something like vegetation growth underneath these things?
Yes, so we do seeding underneath, and then we also do maintenance 2 to 3 times a year as needed, because the weeds, really,
Yeah.
everything tends to grow up past the panels, and if it grows up over the panels, what happens is that impacts the production
So he
too.
used to goats.
Yeah. You're not gonna hire somebody to bring their sheep in?
Well, the sheep, yeah,
No, I went to a clean energy conference a couple of weeks ago, and there were a couple of people up there that bought a farm, put in the solar stuff, and they actually, they get paid for running the sheep underneath the thing to clean all the vegetation out.
They do that in Wales.
Yeah, and on the vegetation side, again, sorry, Unofficial, Marathon Engineering, civil engineer for the project. One thing that's often incorporated into the vegetation plan is a pollinator seed mix, and there's a lot of different mixes out there now that are especially blended so that the max height is only about 3 foot tall. So that kind of goes in with the maintenance and the mowing aspect that we was mentioning here too, so that's pretty common.
This is strictly a inverter fed to the grid, there's no battery storage or anything that goes along with it?
no battery storage, no.
Oh, there's a fence around the
Yeah.
whole,
7 foot.
7 foot?
Yep, with a 6-inch gap at the bottom, but plenty of rabbits and stuff through.
Yeah.
What's the common discount to the area folks?
So it's anywhere from 10 to 20%. It's really easy, and actually you could do it right now, not for this array, it's not built yet, for any community solar array, you'll get a letter from Clean Choice or any other number of providers. And what they do is they provide a 10 to 20% discount on your electricity, and I think now it automatically goes on your national grid bill. So instead of getting 2 bills, you just get the one.
Yeah,
But
they
it
do
does,
combined bills now.
yeah,
You'll still pay national grid for carrying it to you, but
you do,
the
yes.
electricity's cheaper.
But you've probably gotten those before. It looks like spam, it's not. They're not very good at their marketing. But that's similar to this, is you'll be able to opt in the same way. And it's just a crediting system, really.
Now, is that strictly for residential, or would that go to commercial use too?
Residential or commercial.
Now, that's a question, Diane, has the town opted out of the modification to the real estate law for solar?
No.
Okay, so you could enter into a payment in lieu of taxes agreement or just assess it, whatever?
Yep.
Okay.
One of the benefits to entering into the pilot is that it's on an escalator over time. So the assessment is done just on the components of the array that do tend to depreciate really quickly. So that assessment would go down over time, whereas with a pilot, you can secure in a certain amount of income, have that on an escalator, and also know what to expect in terms of income for the town over time.
What's your life expectancy of the equipment?
So the inverters have a warranty. Those may need to be replaced. Panels may need to be replaced. But generally, that we'll be pushing 5 megawatts AC into the grid for 24 to 45 years.
Okay, when would you anticipate beginning the construction on this?
So it depends on the permitting approval and when that falls in relation to winter also. So after permitting approval, we secure financing for the construction. And then usually construction starts anywhere from 6 to 8 months after the approvals.
Okay.
And then it lasts for anywhere from 6 months to a year. Usually we try to keep it within 6 months. Most of the heavy construction happens at the beginning. And then the next part is all of the really tedious wiring for the panels, which is a lot quieter, but a lot of work.
Yeah, the reason I ask is right now, the particular zone that gravel pit sits in is called residential seasonal, and it's not currently a permitted use. But the zoning law is in the process of revision, and I would anticipate probably by fall, if we finish all of our paperwork, the new one would be in place, and that would become a permitted use there. And it would be subject to the solar, the solar installation stuff that we have in the ordinance, which I don't think is going to affect much there. The big difference is that because you're only 5 megawatts, the permitting process will go through the codes officer and probably through the ZBA, because it does require a conditional use permit. That would allow us to set conditions, or see what conditions you're putting on there and set additional ones if necessary.
What was the definition of the public utility structure? Because that is permitted in the RS, but.
Yeah, a public utility structure, but this, and the ZBA may have to render an interpretation if asked, but normally, if it's privately owned as opposed to being a public or regulated utility, it would be considered a privately owned facility, even if you are grid connected.
In terms of the permitted use too, so we were given a bylaw from 2017, a solar bylaw. Is that one that's in place for the town right now?
I don't know, Diane, what, did you guys pass something?
No.
I don't know of any solar law that was actually adopted here. I think they were considering one, but I don't think it's actually been adopted, so right now, there isn't anything in the current zoning other than what's permitted on the property that would even cover the solar stuff, which is one of the reasons why we're adding all the revisions to the new zoning law. We're basically going to replace the old one. But being under the 20 megawatt limit, where you could opt for for the ORIS permitting, it would come through us. But we're not really that hard over. We just want to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's crossed.
The big thing's the bonding and making sure
Yeah.
that somebody don't run away and leave a big, because there's some stuff there that you just really don't want to go to bed with every night,
And I know with the bond, usually it's a condition upon approval, so you approve the amount for the decommissioning bond, the decommissioning plan, and then it would be a condition on approval. So when we go to get the building permit for construction, we post the bond prior to that.
Well, yeah, because the road's got to be considered, because you're going over a town road to get to that. You're not coming off the county road.
Yeah.
There's no way possible you're coming off the county road for that. So, but for the town of Western's sake, most of the road you'd be beating up is Tom Lee's road, so.
Yeah, it's true, until you pass that little V intersection there, you're on the top of the lane.
You have the natural buffer that works with that area. Are you doing anything to maintain that natural buffer?
We can do that, so I think that's sort of why we're interested in some feedback.
We would
on
be
that.
looking at those as some of the conditions that would go along there.
How close are any houses around that? There's houses there.
That's what those white blotches are, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
there's a couple small houses right up by that intersection there. But if you look at them, they're pretty, they even have their own natural screening. They don't really look down into the old gravel bed. And I'm guessing it would be at least 100 feet away from any boundary line.
Can we have those numbers? I think that's in the packet too, of references.
Yeah.
to distance.
Plus, we would be imposing a, minimum setback from your boundary, from your property lines anyway, so.
Do you know around what that minimum setback would be?
Copy of what would be, and we'd have to look up what would be in the new ordinance. And I think we might have set it at around 100 feet. I'm just talking off the top of my head, though I'm not positive.
And the new zoning district would be what again, sorry?
The new zoning district would be called a residential rural agricultural. And there's a very broad base of permitted uses within the thing.
This access road you're putting in is actually, you're putting it in because there is another access road in there that I don't even see on the map.
Well, it's the one that goes
Yeah, there's an.
in, this whole road goes in between the two houses they used to use for the gravel access.
All kinds of boats back there. Well, maybe
Right
not.
now.
Right now, this time of year.
Right.
Okay.
So what were you saying about in lieu of taxes? What would be the in lieu of taxes?
So it's
What is given?
There's a provision in the real estate law that normally if the town would opt into it, there is a provision for tax abatement for a certain number of years. If the town does not opt into that provision, in other words, if we don't opt out of it, either the town can assess it for whatever the assessed value is, and that would be up to Steve to determine, or you can enter into a payment in lieu of taxes agreement. And they would, pay you, X amount per acre or per megawatt of power or something like that. And that would be an annual payment to the town and to the school district and I guess to the county too, so.
As far as your depreciation, I got an answer for that too. National Grid come at us on that. All their power towers, they wanted us to drop the assessment on them. And I says, Christ, the scrap price is 3 times what it was when you built them, so.
Steal it, not to mention the aluminum and the
So,
wires.
what do you want us to do for you? We never heard no more.
And if you do choose to go with the route of the taxes, New York State has released a calculator that's being used for that assessment now.
Yeah,
So that-
I think I have a copy of it, or I read a copy of it the other day as I was going through their stuff. If the board is interested, I can send you links to some of the New York State publications that talk about solar installations if you want to read through all of those and understand what's going on. Yeah, the biggest difference here is because it's a relatively small installation, it's just going to fall on the planning board and then onto the ZBA to do the evaluation, the permitting, and make sure everything is up to snuff on it.
I mean, the reality is with National Grid's infrastructure in the foreseeable future, you're not gonna see too much, a whole lot bigger. than
Yeah,
this.
actually, I had a chance a couple of weeks ago to talk with the National Grid people, and they have a plan in place to start upgrading their distribution system to be able to handle all of this. Longer-term plan.
So in the town of Western, we'll see that in 30 years.
No, they'll, with something like this going on, they will automatically start doing that.
And we cover the cost of that, so there are some upgrades that will be done at the substation and the feeder level. We pay for those upgrades.
Yeah. So you'll feed them at what, 13.2, which is their standard distribution?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that line that comes over and down, that's your new access road? No, up above.
Yep,
Coming off Slide Hill Road.
yep,
And that'll be the staging area kind of for building the project?
yeah.
Yeah. Build on that.
Okay.
Do you try to source materials locally as far as like the wire and stuff, or do you?
We generally do, so in terms of panels, those do tend to come from, right now it's China. There's some federal legislation that's pushing manufacturing in the United States, so I think we're hoping to get American-made panels by then, but they're still ramping up that manufacturing. Inverters tend to come from Germany. There's not a lot of manufacturers in the US right now though, and that is changing in the next 2 years. But we do try to do local labor, and we are using, local engineering firms and installers.
How local the labor? I mean, are any of them gonna speak English?
It should be relatively local. It's cheaper for local labor anyways in terms of having people, you don't have to house people.
Well, it wasn't done on
You
short
don't have to
road.
pay them per diem or anything else.
But you know, the funny thing is if you asked any of them for help, oh, and they'll speak English. I dropped a $50 bill, why, there was a hell of a commotion. They knew exactly what you'd done.
Well, and we do have to pay, I'm pretty sure, prevailing wage on this now too. So NYSERDA released some guidelines about that, and so did New York State. So that's one of the requirements that I think we're under
Yeah, I
now.
haven't never looked
I'm
at
gonna be
that.
able to afford it.
Right?
You have to keep paying prevailing wage and I can be able to afford it. Well, you will because we'll pay our electric bill.
If they're, okay, you probably know we had a little tornado here a couple years ago. Okay, when a tornado hits that and blows it over to his farm, who's responsible and what kind of toxicity are we looking at?
So it's unlikely it'd make it all the way over there, but if a panel breaks, it's just glass. It's glass and silicone and wires. There's nothing liquid inside the panels. So what we would do is we would clean that up and then we'd replace the panels.
On site?
Yeah, there's
Not
nothing,
over his farm?
well, we would pick it up from wherever it lands, and then we would clean it up and then replace it on the site.
So these panels are made of what? There's
Silicone, glass.
It's
wires.
metallic silicon, either thin film or crystalline, and it's coated over with glass to protect it. They are actually pretty non-polluting.
okay.
I can't speak for the manufacturer of the damn things, but the panels themselves are pretty much non-polluting.
And they actually move.
They move, yes, very slowly. So if you stand there for half an hour, you'll see them shift just a little bit throughout the day.
Do any type of training annually for first responders?
Yeah, we usually do. So often it's a condition on approval too, but we do agree to do training, with especially the fire department. I think usually what happens, if there is any sort of fire within the fence line, you typically let it burn unless it jumps outside the fence line. So yeah, we do
More
that
concerns
training.
if someone is.
If someone's in there. Mhm.
Yeah.
And we have a Knox box at the entrance too, so you guys can get in.
So you'd be able to pretty much de-energize it if somebody needs to be hauled out from underneath the panels or something?
Yeah, so there is a disconnect on National Grid side, and then there's also a disconnect on our side, too. Yeah.
But that's on the output side.
That's at the output side.
And this isn't fenced in. Yeah, on here.
How about somebody going in to access, now where do your inverters actually sit? Up with the field, right?
Yep, so those
Yeah.
will be on the concrete inverter pads here, and there are disconnects there.
Yeah,
too.
that would be the main thing, is that the emergency services will have to be able to de-energize that.
Yep.
Because I can't imagine much burning besides the inverters.
There really shouldn't be, and typically you'd be able to do the disconnect down here too,
Yeah.
but if you had to get in, you could do it at the inverters.
Over the life of the panels, what is is there any maintenance, is there any washing of the panels, is there any?
No washing of the panels. The rain keeps them pretty clean, and snow does tend to come off them faster than it would a typical roof too, and especially because they're living, it'll come off. There's no de-icing or any chemicals used.
They pretty much de-ice themselves once the sun hits them.
They do, yeah. And that's probably why you don't see a lot of carports in New York, because once the sun hits them, it all comes off. It's kind kind of a hazard.
I know, I got a
No
metal roof,
parking.
I got a metal roof on my house.
Yeah.
I have avalanches in the winter, as soon as it warms up.
Snowfall, will you just automatically tip them just so that it does clean off? And
They do it themselves, so they move on their own. They're a tracker and they move slowly
I
throughout the day.
understand that, but if we got a heavy snow and there's no sun, can you automatically push some buttons and go boop and let it fall off and then?
Yeah, we wouldn't do that. I think we would wait for the snow to come off of the panels, if it wasn't heavy snow. But if you've seen solar on any roofs before, over the course of, even if it's a few days, eventually that comes off.
No, I hate to dispute that. We have solar panels and no, they do not melt within a few days. The snow and ice continues to build, and when it does slide off, it destroys, it's an avalanche, it shakes the house. But no, it can go weeks, and with no energy being generated whatsoever from those panels, it does not come off within a few days. No.
So these
And also, I
panels,
wanted to ask lithium, are these lithium batteries that you're using in these solar panels?
There's no
batteries.
No batteries? What's generating the power for the panels then?
The sun.
The sun, so the,
The solar panels themselves absorb the
Yes.
sunlight and convert it to electricity. In an installation like this, it's then run through the wires over to the inverters, which converts the DC energy into AC energy, and that goes down and is fed into the power system. There's no that's why I was asking before, there's no storage batteries on here for continuity, so it's basically, you get 8 hours of sunshine, you might get 8 hours of power. If you get 15 hours of sunshine, you get that much more.
But if they wanna put that in, they have to come back to you, right?
Pardon?
If they wanna put battery storage in, they have to come back to you, right?
Yeah, that would be a modification of the installation, yeah.
and battery storage you won't see on a lot of arrays up here. It's really, really costly.
Yeah.
And it really only pays for itself in New York
Really,
City.
really expensive.
Yeah.
I just paid almost $100 for a 14 amp hour, 12 volt lithium battery, so.
to add on to that snow load discussion, these are a tracker system that you were mentioning, and the max angle is actually quite steep.
Yeah.
Not like a shallow pitch roof where they.
Yeah, but by the time you rotate around to see the setting sun, you're gonna be up at a pretty good angle.
I assume that
Yeah.
any issues that come up with it, you have remote, like the panels or whatever will say, hey, I got an issue. It's not- I mean, how often would we expect somebody being in there to service?
So it's services as needed, but there is remote monitoring of it. There's maintenance for the groundskeeping that happens every few times a year. But the remote monitoring will show if there's a lack of performance. So there'll be, we call them string inverters here. String inverters have, I think, 26 panels or so. Is it 26? Around there per inverter. So if one of the panels on the 26 isn't performing, it affects the production of all 26 of those. And that inverter performance is monitored. So we can come and replace the panel then if it's a panel or an electrical issue that's monitored remotely. So we have people, usually it's locally that come out. And when I say locally, I mean like Syracuse area probably, or Albany area.
And we can provide a detailed operation and maintenance plan as part of that. It's pretty routine.
There's no storage of extra panels on site or anything like that. Everything's brought in and brought out. No.
There is an operation maintenance plan in there. Because the components, we haven't purchased them yet, so we don't have the spec sheets for you just yet. But we will, it is going to be string inverters. We're not allowed to change from string to a different inverter at this point with National Grid. But the panels and inverters operate pretty similarly, but we can provide the spec sheets when we pull the building permit.
Yeah, just something for us to look at.
Yeah.
I'm probably the only one who will understand it.
What kind of DC voltage are these panels generating before they go into the inverters?
So that's rated about 7 megawatts DC. So we've talked a little about DC and AC. I know some of you guys know about DC and AC, but for those who don't know as much, the DC rating on the panels is a little bit higher than the inverters. So the inverters are rated at 5 megawatts AC. That's what's allowed to be pushed into the grid, and that's what National Grid and New York State allow. The panels are rated at 7 megawatts, and the reason for that is so they can produce a higher amount through more of the day. They're producing the peak 5 megawatts through more hours of the day. So it's sort of kind of like a cost to build ratio so that we can expand the maximum amount of output for, instead of from, let's say 12 to 1, it's from 10 to 2 is producing that maximum amount. Yeah, that's a good question.
So if you do, so how do they stop it from overloading?
The inverters.
The inverters do that. That's where the control is.
So they gotta generate heat, or how are they dissipating?
So it's called clipping. So it's just that the additional electricity doesn't go to the grid.
Yeah.
It stops at 5 megawatts AC. It's really common to do this, especially in New York. We're obviously not the sunniest state. So to be able to expand the top performance of the solar array to 5 megawatts AC, which is the limit that can go into the grid, stopped at the inverters, is really key to be able to make it possible to build and afford to build. National Grid does inspections at the inverter and at all the points of interconnection too. So part of the construction we talked about with the wiring, that's a big part of it, but the other part is getting the utility out here to do the inspections and the tests, and that takes some time to do.
And you said your feeder lines from the inverters are going to be buried all the way down to the interconnect point?
Yep.
And how deep are you going?
With the trench?
Yes.
They're about 3 foot typically.
Is that marked above ground?
It would have to be marked above ground.
They're heavily marked, yeah. No, they use armored cable for that, so.
I can find that out. We're the civil engineer. It's not really in our wheelhouse, but I can certainly find out.
Only because if somebody continues to use a field of hay or something like that, somebody goes in there and digs, the last thing you want them to do is get in a 13-2 line.
Voltage is usually conduit and encased in concrete.
Yeah, well, you don't have to do concrete if you're just gonna direct bury it, but. Yeah, I'm just curious as to what the protection factor on the buried cable is.
It's a fair question. We'll find out, right? Especially on such a long run.
Yeah.
And the wire underneath the panels is 3 foot too?
So that is typically run along the racking of the system, and then anytime you have to jump from table to table, it's done underground. Yeah, but we can provide those details for reference as well.
And when you take that out, everything's taken out, or do you leave any substructure in place, anything below the surface?
Everything is taken out.
Have you taken any out yet?
That's gonna be my question.
New York started their community solar program, really their solar program, it's maybe 2012, and they sort of stepped it up over time to allow for 5 megawatts. So prior to 2018, it was only 2 megawatts that were allowed to be interconnected at a time. So New York sort of created this market for it, but there hasn't been, none of them have hit 25 years yet.
Yeah, I was doing some research on that, and somewhere I read that there has never been a decommissioning because they aren't old enough yet.
Mm-hmm. And once you invest in the construction of the array, the cost for maintenance and for upkeep is really low. So for it to be able to produce that energy, it's valuable to the owner, but it's also valuable to the grid to have. So you're paid on this sort of stack of energy, and part of it is to be able to actually put that into the grid and have that availability to put it into the grid is really necessary for National Grid to have to decommission all these old power plants and peaker plants.
So just a question out of curiosity, do you bid with the ISO, or are you small enough where you don't have to do that?
The ISO limit is 20 megawatts.
Okay.
So, no, you don't.
Well, like all these panels, I know down where I was working, there's no concrete around those. That's I-beams pounded about 12, 14 feet into the, depending on what the soil contained.
Yep. That's exactly.
They drill the holes, they fill them full of crushed stone, and then drive the piles into them.
Yeah, I'd be more worried about the wind getting underneath it and lifting it up than how much soil bearing it needs.
And we usually do, what is the test called when we go out and we dig?
There's a full geotechnical
Yeah.
analysis that's going to be done, and once It usually isn't done during this phase, because, developers want to know that they can get through the process before investing $20,000 to $30,000 on a geotech.
Yeah.
And then the structural analysis, so any of the final permit drawings will come through, will have all that information in there.
You're gonna hit shale before you get your,
Yeah, so that's the
simple
point,
point.
so typically, you're right, it's a driven pile, but they can also use ground screws, they can go.
use some roads, yeah.
Yeah.
Right to rock.
And you said, where it comes out to Stokes Western Road, that's not gonna be fenced?
This will not be fenced down here, no, so that there's easy access for the utility. They don't have to have a key or anything to enter into it. No. We're not allowed to fence in National Grid's per their code.
Does National Grid do anything for themselves?
Yeah, so they'll install the first few poles here, and they're gonna do some upgrades to the line here in the substation. We pay for those, but they do those upgrades.
You may have answered this, but how, this far into the process, how many of these that make it this far into the process are you successful with? Seems like you've got a lot of work into this one already.
There's a lot that's gone into this one already, and I think because of where it is and because of especially the interconnection that works, we've invested more money into this going into the permitting process. I would say, it's hard to say hitting permitting, but from the first contract signed, which is a non-binding contract, in my pipeline about 70% fall out. And that's usually happens before the permitting stage. Yeah, I don't think, usually at permitting, there's not as many. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? With respect to power outages, cutting feed to National Grid services, should there be an emergency that requires that, are those panels simply shut off automatically, or does everything go to ground? And if it does go to ground, is there any impact to?
Yeah, that's a good question. So automatically, so let's say there's a power outage and the line, the feeder is down or the substation is down, there's an automatic shut off. So there won't be any power produced or pushed into the grid.
So each of the panels actually shut down individually?
No,
or is
the panels, as long as they're in the sun, they're going to produce a voltage across their two terminals. But what will not happen is you won't get energy flowing from the inverters down to the power grid.
Correct, but where does it go?
Who will own the disconnect down at Stokes Westernville Road?
National Grid.
National Grid will own that, so that will be under their own control.
Yeah.
So yeah, if they need to cut it off, they simply open the disconnect, and that field can sit there and produce electricity all day long, but it's not going into the grid.
And where's it going?
Doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, current doesn't flow unless you give it something to flow through. It'll produce a voltage and the inverters can kick it out at AC, but it's not going anywhere. Be just a lot of sunlight going to waste.
It doesn't, it's not like water where it needs a place to go. I don't know if it's a good metaphor, but yeah.
No, any of the arrays that you have currently, how many do you have currently in production?
Right now we have, I'd have to get those numbers for you. I work as a project developer. We have 3 other project developers who work with us in New York. But I can get those numbers for you, yeah.
What about this area?
In this area right now, I have the Ansel project that's in pre-construction phase. And then I personally have a few that are towards the end of the permitting stage out in Buffalo, in southern New York. We've got one that our managing member worked on in Clifton Park. I could get you a list. Would you want to speak to some of those landowners who've worked with us before? Would that help?
I'm trying to get a sense too. I mean, have you, ones that are operational, you're 2 to 3 years in, have you sold that project or do you maintain ownership?
So typically, we do sell it once we secure all the jurisdictional permits. Right now, we're working on keeping the ownership of those solar arrays. So the reason that it's submitted as Sly Hill Solar is because all the agreements are under that LLC. A lot of times in the industry, what happens is you sell it to a financing company, and then they then contract with companies like us, civil engineering firms, and companies that specialize in the construction of the solar array. I know right now we're working on maintaining those assets, so keeping it through the construction phase.
Yeah, because I think that might be one concern for us, is to make sure that when it does change hands, that the initial parameters are maintained and not lost through ownership.
And that's why when you look at solar arrays that are permitted throughout the state, they're maintained under that LLC. That's because it maintains all of the agreements. So all of the conditions on approval are maintained, the agreements of decommissioning bond, cost, and plan, all those conditions, as well as the lease, the agreements with National Grid, the jurisdictional permits and approvals through the DEC, all of those are housed right under there.
The project of this size, what is the investment? How much is it in dollars?
It does depend. I could get you those numbers, so I work on the permitting side. I don't work on our.
I asked, Western hasn't had much investment,
So.
other than some dairy farms might got a little bigger over the years. I mean, are we talking $5 million, $3 million, $1 million?
5 million is too high, and I think from what I've seen working in upstate New York Solar, the region here, the territory that you're in, or the load zone with National Grid, is much lower cost electricity than you'd see in the region out near Buffalo, Albany, and especially near this New York City region and Orange County and Rockland County. So a lot more solar went in down there because the electricity rates were higher, they could afford to build. I can say from my personal experience, up until a few years ago, it cost more to build an array in this area than it did for what the value of the array was at. And that's because of the electricity rates. But recently, NYSERDA has jumped in to help pay for, especially the prevailing wage that they're requiring. There are tax credits through the federal government that have helped a bit. But you don't see as much in this region because the electricity rates were so low. And I say that knowing that my parents live up here, their electricity rates are really high. But when you look at any rates in other areas, especially southern New York, near New York City, those rates are really high. So there's a lot more going in down there on the
Yeah, but
rooftops.
we compared to Boonville Power here.
Yes.
That's true, yeah. Boonville Power is lower, are they?
Much lower.
Fall off a cliff lower.
In the winter, I pay about 5.5 cents a kilowatt hour.
Okay.
But my thing is still, I'm about $120 a month. That's $4 to $5 a day. You can't hire 5 Amish guys and get that much production out of them for $5 a day. So it still isn't a bad deal.
And this is kind of taking the hat off from Sole Source Power, but if you were to get those, things in the mail that say opt in to this clean energy, I do encourage you to look into it for your households because you can save now on your electricity.
Yeah, but what happens there is you save in one part and then National Grid will just up the delivery charge or something, so
No, their delivery charges are regulated, but that's where they make their money. They
One thing may
make
come
money
back
on
to
your
your
electricity.
the topography.
Oh, yeah, we recognize this is not nearly a full submission.
Yeah, no, yeah, just so.
Sir, are you on the civil engineering side? No, okay, but I recognize that you're there. Just wanted to, okay.
I've got a stupid question, which I'm going to ask anyway. Why do we need this?
It's not why we need it, it's the property owner as much as anything.
Okay, but what is it going to do for Westonville?
So part of it
Apart
is,
from giving us a small discount on our...
Well, two things. If you opt into, buying that particular electricity, the power is cheaper, and number two, you now have a development of a piece of basically vacant land that's not paying much by way of taxes either.
Okay.
I mean, typically, some of the stuff that I looked into when they're talking about pilot agreements and stuff, and I don't know what this one would turn out to be, but they were talking anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 a year per megawatt in tax payments, which is a lot more than that empty gravel bed is paying right now.
And the people that own that property have a right to realize
Yeah.
some potential income off of their property.
Was it assessed at rear?
Huh?
Was it assessed at rear? Or you don't know that offhand?
He didn't come in, so I don't know.
And, no, last.
And I
But
haven't-
you've got perfect property for a solar array on the backside of your property up there, Rita.
Windmills, yes. Windmills.
No, you won't want windmills.
High wind power, yes.
And I
No, we
haven't
got
gotten
some
final
in the power
assessment yet.
outages.
And
I don't
that's
get that.
We got a load.
one of the benefits to solar in New York is that because the developers like SolSource are paying for the upgrades to the grid, it allows National Grid to do upgrades that help with resiliency. So you get less power outages. So we put the bill for that. There are a lot of upgrades to be done across National Grid, across every utility in the US. It's really aging infrastructure. It was built a long time ago. And that's part of why solar doesn't work on so many properties that seem to work at first, because of that infrastructure.
The big whine and cry you have in this part of the country is you see the power lines. We ain't getting any benefit from that. That's all going down to them morons down there on the island.
The large power lines, and the good part about the smaller size, and we had mentioned the megawatt size, there was 20 megawatts that is the ISO, which connects into those really large lines. These are the same lines that currently feed it. So they're just the three-phase lines that are at the road, that go to businesses and homes in the area. We don't put in any of those really big power lines. Those are too high of a
Yeah,
voltage.
that's all transmission, not distribution.
And
Comes off the substation on Turn Road and then comes up this way.
That Tuttle property, he had another property that they got denied because they didn't have infrastructure to take on
Yeah.
the size solar farm that they wanted to put in there.
now we had heard if this project does go through, that pretty much taps out grid in that substation on Turn Road.
I'd have to check, I think it does. The Turn Road substation, for the most part, I'd have to look at the numbers on that, but I'm pretty sure there isn't anything else in there. It's a 28.5 MVA substation. There's about 30 megawatts going into it, which is usually about a 1-for-1 ratio, so it pretty much taps it out.
Yeah. But what's interesting is if this feeds into the distribution lines, that's less power they have to pull off the transmission line.
So they might curtail any further development around here until they can upgrade or.
Well, and mostly it's the capacity of the lines themselves. I mean, they can go up and replace them with a larger gauge wire, or what happened sometime with Boonville did a few years ago. They upped the distribution voltage so they can use the same size wires.
And the wires here, so to give you a sense of those upgrades, they can only fit, you were saying they can only fit so much on the 13.2 kV lines. To do a really long feeder upgrade to those utility lines, or a major upgrade to the substation, which would allow you to install 5 more solar arrays, the cost is anywhere from, just for the substation, $10 to $22 million. No developer can afford that. No project is worth that. Those upgrades, I never want to say that they're impossible, but they're just so unlikely.
Yeah, National Grid went in, I don't know, about 10, 12 years ago and did the upgrade on that substation. They upped the capacity to the 28.5.
So essentially what that means is there really isn't space for more distribution solar like this.
I think that's a good start. I don't know if anybody else. has
Yeah,
any
no,
questions
that's.
or- Scott, you got any?
In terms of the decision around the zoning on all the properties, I guess what would the timetable be on that, and when should we wait to submit or follow up?
Well, right now, in fact, I just sent off the draft copy of the proposed law to go on the website and stuff. But we have to go through the secret process. We have to go through the county and post it on the DE website, because that's all this type 1 secret actions. So that's probably another 3 months worth of work. So I would anticipate probably by the end of the fall, We'll have to have the formal public hearing and the town board will vote on the new law. It'll probably in the,
That's for
September.
our zoning changes.
That's for the new zoning law. And that will include all the provisions for the solar stuff, and it will include the change in the zoning, which now makes that, which would make that a permitted use there. So that would be. then
Now, if
just-
they wanted to proceed before that,
I mean, you can come in with, you know, with preliminary engineering ahead of time and we'll look at it, but, you know, right now, it would be considered a non-conforming use. And if you're leasing the land, you'd actually have to work with the Andregs and have them come in and ask for a use variance. And there's things that they would have to do that, to get that variance ahead of time. And by the time they did all that, you probably have the new law in place anyway.
Right. And use variances are pretty complicated.
They're a pain in the butt to get. The ZBA does not like to grant them.
I've yet to come across a ZBA that does.
You jump through 20 hoops now or 10 hoops later.
Yeah.
And it's, one's gonna meet the other.
Just, yeah, I would anticipate that once that law is in place, we just impose a we impose, well, it will be called, in the new ordinance, it will be called a special use permit, which just means you've got to come in and present all the information. We can put some conditions on it because you're below the ORS thing anyway, that would fall on us to do. So both the planning board here and then the zoning board of appeals, which would rule on your conditional use or your actual special use permit, you know, we'd all get together and go through the, so yeah, I mean, I would plan on, you know, coming in for a couple of months, you know, talking about the engineering and asking questions and stuff, so that we would be able to evaluate what's actually happening with it. Unlike some towns whose stuff I've read, we are not gonna get into the details of how your inverters work or what size wiring you run on the panels. We're looking at how you're gonna use the land and what the impact of that use is.
What was your anticipated timeline?
It really depends on all of you and the town and what your rules are. I think we had gotten a copy, it must have been of the draft solar bylaw.
That's probably what it was, yeah.
So we had fit the drawings, the plans that sort of into that.
Well, you still would have run into zoning no matter what. Even with the solar bylaw, you would have still had to conform with, be in conformance with the zoning, which would have been the, you know, the use variance anyway.
And you weren't gonna go any larger than 5 megawatts, right? Because that, I mean, you're pretty much.
Yeah.
That's
Well, that's about all you're gonna fit on that piece of property anyway, so. How big is the property? 30 acres?
90 acres on parcel, 32
Well,
acres.
the area you're talking about developing is about 30 acres?
30
Yeah,
acres,
because.
yeah. And these are two separate parcels, so I think one of our questions was, it crosses two separate parcels.
Okay.
They're both owned by the Andregs.
Right.
That's a big thing right there.
Is that, would you prefer us to do a parcel merge, or are we able to permit it across both?
You could permit it across both. The only thing we'd be concerned with is if the Andrex decided to, now would you have a permanent right-of-way for your underground? Yeah, if you negotiate a right-of-way or an easement for your underground feeder coming from down there, doesn't make any difference, because even if they sold it to somebody else, the easement would go with the property, so.
Right.
That would be the only concern, is if somebody else came in and owned it and decided they wanted to do something with the property. So it would be subject to that.
In terms of the draft solar bylaw did you say you had written up, or?
Yeah,
Is there anything that, are you able to share a copy of it? Because what we could do is look at that and make any adjustments.
I don't
needed
have
to
it,
this.
but I can email you that portion of the ordinance, with the understanding that it's still in draft form.
Yeah,
Sure.
that makes
But-
sense.
Yeah, we looked at Westmoreland's, we still gotta look through that and see
Yeah.
how, we're taking some different ideas from some local
Yeah,
communities.
right now, most of what we're writing up came out of the city of Rome
Okay.
for the aspects of stuff. And theirs has already been through their legal counsel review, and it's actually been put into their city law as part of their zoning.
Sorry, go ahead.
So we're fairly confident with that. One of the issues that came up in the town of Westmoreland is the company went in and they were going to install across several different ownerships of land, and we were concerned about that as to whether we may write into the thing that, you know, the property has to be, you know, aligned to one continuous owner. But, you know, again, if you have, if the one parcel contains all of the solar stuff and there's nothing more than an easement to, you know, to bring the line across, you know, that's a whole different story, because whoever buys it is still gonna be subject to that easement.
If I may ask just a question, or make a suggestion even, any of these municipalities that have recently gone through their solar bylaw and haven't really put a solar project into practice or gone through the approval yet, or if there's a couple that have and just really put their newly adopted solar law, ask them the questions of, hey, are there any issues that kind of came to light after the fact? We've run into that a couple times with a new solar ordinance. It sounds good and reads good on paper, but until you put it into practice, you can kind of find some challenges.
Yeah, because in Rome, most of their existing solar stuff is already in place before they put the new stuff in. And most of what they put in there was an answer to, or as, you know, being able to come in and saying, hey, this is what's gonna happen whether you like it or not.
How close are you to adjacent properties?
We can get the numbers on that. I think
Okay.
how close we are to all the adjacent properties,
Well,
the setbacks. So I think
there's a border.
Yeah. I think, and you mentioned the 100-foot setback too, so we might have to make
I would have to confirm that, but.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll use, is this your email on here?
Yep.
All right, I'll send you the understanding of this draft of what's in there and what the setbacks and stuff are that we have.
I think Carol has a question over there.
What is the impact going to be as far as the traffic from the construction on Stokes Westernville Road, and who is going to be responsible for maintaining any damage to the road?
So we would, and I think during,
Say they couldn't do it.
we could make that a condition on approval here, or we could discuss that when we pull a building permit too. But it might be helpful to make it a condition on approval.
Big part of that.
Would that be where your access is coming up from Stokes Westernville Road
Right,
instead of off of Sly Hill?
No,
So-
they're gonna be coming up
The
Slide
So you're
Hill.
gonna be coming up Sly Hill, yeah, so you would have to talk to the town of Lee as well as the town of Western.
80% of that's town of Lee.
And with that, we have to, I know the Ansville project was within 500 feet of the town of Lee, so they had to be sent all the plan sets too.
This is
along
same
the
with
county.
this,
Yeah, yeah.
it's that whole 239M stuff that goes on.
Yeah, and what we've done before in other projects is have done a road condition survey, both pre-construction and post-construction, so that there's a catalog of photos, look at the conditions of the culverts and the road condition itself.
Lee Center's part of it, they paved that 2 years ago, so. In their typical backcountry, they were goat paths that got paved. There's not a lot of superstructure.
That's how you got up to the farms on the top of the hill.
But where you're going in that's definitely the choice place to go into that area.
Yeah.
That was the first part of the gravel that they took off of there, and it's been pretty barren for quite a few years. There's not much room there.
Yeah. You're right, just a few boats.
Yeah.
Down in the-
They're down a little
Yeah,
bit further. but-
Down farther.
Yeah, just about, yeah. Yeah, that road goes in right about where your, where the conversion station is there. That one road goes in.
I think that was a good start to the project.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of questions answered, and I think you guys got some feedback that you can go back and provide some, yeah, we'll just, like, we are plodding along with our draft. We were getting a little bit behind because we had some other projects come up. So I haven't Scott, have you heard anything more about the Elmer Hill Road project?
Nothing.
Okay, which is good, because that.
There's corner road there. It's not happening until at least fall. And I would suggest that, not just because of your project in Ainsville, but they just did one over on Billy Boardman's property there, and Ainsville ought to be pretty well. You probably didn't put much over on them when you went into their town board meetings.
Well, and their planning board had never done site plan review. So when we initially went, it was their first time reviewing any project with the
Really?
planning board. They'd only done subdivisions before that. So we worked with them a bit on that. They were really receptive. They asked for a lot of materials related to the infrastructure, the things that you said you're not necessarily going to ask. But we worked with them on it.
So I was gonna say that Boardman, that one's already in. That
There
was,
was, yeah, so that array went in, that was town board that reviewed that.
all right.
Yeah.
So the town board didn't want to do no more.
New York State, I think, released some guidance that planning boards had to assume site plan review after a certain year. That was going to be a requirement, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, I believe Monday now you've already got one variance
Yes,
or
we have a
something.
request for conditional use permit on Buck Hill.
And
So we will now have
And then
the
I'll,
conditional use.
I'll do
for the fire
another legal
department.
notice tomorrow and
Get
have it
that
run
out
the
so we
same
have, so
day.
we fill within the 5 days, and then we
Yeah.
can legitimately have a public hearing.
Yeah.
Just other old business, I got all those comments that Matt Johnson sent back to us on the zoning thing. I've incorporated them into the text,
Okay.
and I've also modified the definitions, to correspond to what he's did. There's a couple of changes that were made in there. I sent copies to Larry to put on the website. So probably the easiest place to read the things would be to go, once he gets them on the website, you can go there and just pull them down and read through it to make sure we've covered everything. I put some asterisks where I made some notable changes on the definitions, either added stuff or I deleted a couple that were basically duplicates. So that we've covered that, this was mostly based on Matt's comments. So we can look at that, and if we're happy with it, hopefully by next month, we can declare it as a final draft.
So would you, probably not gonna have time next week for Matt?
I don't see the Buck Hill thing as taking more than about 10 or 15 minutes, because it's just, they want to put a house on 100 acres of land in an open space zone, and
Okay, and that's not the one,
that's
that's not the one we were talking about?
No, that's a different one. No, the one you emailed me about is a whole different one.
This is open space district. They want to build a house.
Okay.
Yeah, that just requires a conditional use permit, so we make
On
sure
100
that,
acres.
yeah. And they're a couple of 100 feet from everything there, so it's not a big deal.
They could put it in the middle of the 100 acres.
Almost, yeah.
And I got the 239 back for that.
Oh, you have it, okay.
Now,
So for the members that
The only thing, I'll have to do an EAF on it, but.
are you going to have a joint meeting?
It's a type 2.
On
that's-
the 26th?
That's what I'm trying to
Yes.
figure, I don't know if we have enough time to do a joint meeting, that's what I'm,
I think,
I don't
we're not
know.
gonna need more than a half an hour, so if we wanna meet at 7:30 and do some joint work, we can.
I won't be there.
okay. No worries.
The ZBA at 7 and the planning board at
Yeah,
7:30.
Planning board at 7:30.
Bill will
Okay.
be here.
We go back over all the draft stuff there.
So
And Larry, as you saw there, I did put a watermark on it, so all these things say draft, so anybody is free to read it who can get to the website, but, understand, these are just draft copies and they're not final at all.
yeah, so for the members, the Town of Western's website, you'll be able to go on there, look at the draft. If you get a chance, take a look at the solar section. I'll try to forward that email from Westmoreland,
Yeah.
their law, and then you can look over what they had put in on their law, and then maybe we should pull up Ansville too. And
I
see.
think I saw a copy of theirs already, some of the stuff that I got from Matt before. And theirs was one of those things, they wanted to look at everything,
Yeah.
and I don't think we really want to do that.
The only thing I can say for them is they've been through it.
Yeah.
Right, that's, I'm just curious to see.
But they had stuff written in there, talking about looking for, certifications on the inverters and the rest of the stuff, and so.
Yeah.
really kinda got out of hand, so.
You got people
I think it
qualified to
happened with
follow
Big
up.
Law Road too.
Well, the thing is, we do have the authority, when we start reviewing this thing, if we wanna bring somebody in who's a good, a solar engineer and ask them about the stuff, we have the authority to do that, and charge these people for the cost of doing it, for the review process.
So transmitting was on the 26th as well.
Yeah.
I have 2 items.
Now we have, well, the,
Public meeting.
on the 26th, the ZBA will hear the helicopter conditional use,
Yep,
and they'll also hear the variance request for Buck
conditional, so
Hill.
both of those are public hearings.
Yeah,
Because
both of those are public
they're
hearings.
conditional use.
And then the planning board, you're just gonna do regular business, right?
Well, we're just gonna have a combined meeting.
We'll have a design meeting where everybody gets a
We'll be
chance.
working on the draft of the
Yeah.
zoning,
Okay.
so. But it's every Monday meeting in the town is open to the public anyway, so it's not
Yes. I put that in my legal notices.
Yep, there's no further notification that needs to be done. So,
Okay.
yeah, if you haven't heard anything from Elmer Hill Road, we'll.
No, last I knew they were waiting till spring so they could do the perk test.
Okay.
And I haven't heard
I
anything.
said it's.
I would be the type to do it, to try.
Alright.
They must have stopped.
They aren't gonna have a hard time with perk over there anyway.
Yeah, for whatever it's worth, one of the things I looked up, even though that's an RC zone, and they're talking about basically an apartment building, we can apply the planned development residential overlay on top of the thing and allow them to put it in there, so.
Okay, we'll have to.
Yeah, when you look at the law, that's one thing I added back in, was that planned development residential that allows us to do things like apartment buildings and cluster housing.
Okay. I'll check.
It's easier to have it there than not, so.
I'll check with Matt and see if
See if he can make it.
if he's available, what he thinks, and we'll, and like I said, please, guys, if you get a chance, look on the website. If you have trouble getting to it, just send me an email and we'll try to get you a copy.
Yeah.
So, that's all I have for tonight, so.
Move to adjourn.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Yes.
We knew you'd be there to second that.
I've got to go on Zoom call.
It's been pretty quiet all night, but I knew that's something you'd jump at.
I've got to get on Zoom call.
Yeah, Mike, talk to Diane, Steve, the county legislator, brought it up in the town board last week. Was he gonna do that after July 4th though? Close the Western Railroad?
I believe so, yes.
Or wait until after the
I
4th?
started understanding, I knew when I got done.
We gotta talk to Lee Fire Department and cover I think we can use some respectable.
You're welcome.
He's probably lining up whatever lawyers will take us on.
The last time he talked to me, he called me up and was looking at stuff, apologized for being so obnoxious. And he said what he wants to do with the property is put in a 3-season house in his father could live in. During the late spring and summer, when he comes back to Mexico. You're gonna need an area variance because the lot's still too small. And the hell lines and area variance and its use variance. So one you put the house in.
No,
Why are you accessory?